A blistering glare cut across the hallway as Gerald Hayes hoisted a cup of icy water above Janet's head. In one swift motion, the liquid cascaded down her hair and stung her face. "You still don't understand your place," he sneered, voice thick with contempt. "You're nothing but a janitor." Around them, other employees paused, eyes flickering between pity and indifference. For a moment, time froze, Gerald's cruelty hanging in the air like smoke. But as water dripped from her uniform, Janet's gaze remained steady, unbowed. Beneath that gray custodian smock stood Mary Williams, the very founder whose name once gleamed on the building behind them. What happens when someone you've written off refuses to stay in their assigned box? Share your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how Mary peels back the layers of power prejudice and redemption in the chapters ahead. Mary Williams hadn't set foot inside Williams Innovations' lobby in months, no years. After building her fintech empire from a ramshackle office and a used desk lamp, she'd passed the CEO torch to her son Robert, believing in the values she'd instilled. Yet whispers of favoritism, discrimination, and low-level staff fear trailed through the marble halls like dark perfume. Each rumor pulled at her heart. How could the company that once stood for equality now crumble under arrogance? That morning, before anyone else arrived, Mary opened her closet and stared at the charcoal gray uniform laid out like a soldier's armor. The name tag Janet felt foreign on her chest, yet necessary. She tucked her silver hair into a cap, donned gloves that once typed million-dollar contracts, and took a final look in the mirror. The reflection gazing back at her was unfamiliar eyes, clear resolve burning. She exited through the employee entrance, trading her executive pass for a simple swipe card limited to custodial corridors. The shift manager gave her a curt nod, unaware this new janitor carried the weight of decades of triumph and the fury of betrayal. Mary felt the cool morning air hit her cheeks as she wheeled her cart into the underground garage, each squeak of the cartwheels echoing in her chest like a challenge. Ascending to the 10th floor, she passed glass-walled offices where early arriving analysts tapped at keyboards and assistants hurried by earbuds blocking out the world. No one noticed her unremarkable figure, perfect camouflage. She pressed her back against the wall and let them pass, heart pounding like a racehorse. Here in the underbelly of her creation, she would observe. By late evening, after the boardroom lights dimmed and suits filtered out, Mary blinked the glare of overhead fluorescence. It was time. She hauled her cart toward the 42nd floor hallway, mind focused on the first target, Gerald Hayes, operations manager. Rumor painted him as the enforcer of new efficiency measures, his cruelty disguised as discipline. Mary gripped her mop and stepped into the silence. At 22 steps in, Gerald appeared adjusting his tie beneath the harsh hallway sconces. His slicked-back hair and tailored suit screamed authority. He paused, scanning Mary from head to toe as if she were a stray dog invading the estate. "New here," he barked. Mary offered a soft nod. "Yes, sir." "I'm Janet." He snorted. "We don't pay for slow old people. Move faster or don't come back." Before Mary could reply, Gerald's polished shoe ground over the spot she'd just cleaned, leaving a smear of dust. He turned away satisfied. Mary set her jaw knuckles whitening around the mop handle, but forced herself to retreat to the nearest supply closet. There, heart-hammering, she recalled her father's words. "Never let them see you tremble. Let them wonder if you're made of ice." Steadying her breath, she stepped back into the fray, determined not to be unmoored by a tyrant's whim. Over the next nights, Mary cycled through the building's veins, restrooms, elevators, lobby floors, each area polished to mirror shine. All the while, she cataloged every slight the marketing director's coffee spills planted to watch her scramble HR's polite nods masking indifference whispers of, "She's just a cleaner." Every insult was a data point, every scowl a clue. Yet the most painful discovery was the culture of fear anchoring her own custodial team. In break rooms, cleaners exchanged glances but never spoke up. They moved like ghosts present but unseen. Mary offered small words of kindness. "Need a fresh rag?" "I've got the next shift." Slowly, she earned timid smiles, proof that solidarity could blossom even in bleak corridors. As midnight neared on her first week, Mary reached the executive elevator. She paused, hand on the polished steel, and recalled the lobby's grandeur in her CEO days, witness to countless investor triumphs. Now she wore a uniform denouncing her past power trading acclaim for anonymity. Her pulse thrummed with irony. Invisibility was her new weapon. Mary pressed the button, and the elevator hummed upward. Each floor passed with a soft ping, and she gripped her cleaning cart as if it were a shield. On the 45th floor, she stepped off and walked toward the boardroom door, where shadows pooled like spilled ink. Inside, she sensed secrets ripe for unearthing. When Gerald stormed out minutes later, his face contorted with fury over an IT glitch. Mary studied his gait, too sure, too practiced. He rarely glanced down, never at those polishing his floors. She memorized his silhouette and prepared to follow him back to his domain, the operations office. In the coming nights, Janet's routine would become her reconnaissance, mopping, dusting, yet always listening. Mary had become both observer and catalyst, a silent force intent on exposing the erosion of respect at the company's core. Tonight she locked eyes, not with her own reflection, but with the future she would forge, one where dignity and accountability gleamed as brightly as the floors she polished under an assumed name. Mary Williams' return wasn't merely an act, it was the opening move in reclaiming the soul of Williams' innovations. The evening lights had long ago faded from the city skyline when Janet wheeled her cart into the 38th floor hallway. The air conditioning hummed behind the vents, but it did nothing to calm the knot in her stomach. The polished marble floor gleamed under the overhead fluorescence, and in its mirror-bright surface she could see the sharp scuff of her own worn shoes. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Tonight, she reminded herself, was about observation, patience, proof. A soft click announced Gerald Hayes' approach long before she caught sight of him. His shoes tapped a confident staccato against the tile, each step precise and deliberate. He emerged from the break room tie, perfectly knotted shirt sleeves rolled up, just so, a portrait of corporate authority. When he spotted her at the end of the hall, his brow lifted in mock surprise and the corner of his mouth curled. "New face," he said, voice thick with feigned curiosity. He strolled toward her, leaning on the polished metal railing as if it were his own personal throne. "We don't see many night janitors your age," he added, eyes glinting with condescension. "You sure you can keep up?" Janet held the mop handle in both hands, knuckles white against the smooth wood. She blinked, meeting his gaze calmly. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady despite the sudden sting behind her eyes. "I'll keep up." Gerald's smirk stretched wider. "You'd better." He nodded toward the far end of the hallway where a long line of offices stood silent. "See that hallway? I want it spotless by morning, not a speck of dust. And don't think you can rush through it, quality matters." Behind his back, another janitor, a younger man named Felix, paused with a trash bag in hand, glancing nervously at Janet. She offered him a brief, reassuring nod before Gerard turned and continued down the corridor steps, echoing like a challenge. Janet lowered her gaze and set to work. She dipped the mop into the bucket, the solution swirling cold and odorless around the wringer. Her first sweep cleared the nearest section of tile, but as the blade of her mop passed over the surface, a faint streak remained, tiny particles of grime clinging to the edge. Janet paused, frowned, then pressed the mop down again, running it back and forth until every glimmer of dirt vanished. Halfway back, Gerald reappeared at the far end of the hall, arms crossed, watching. Janet straightened, handed the mop to Felix, and knelt to scrub the baseboards with a cloth, determined to exceed the invisible standard he expected. Her muscle memory recalled years of high-stakes boardroom presentations. Now it guided the circular motions of her hand against the wall's cold edge. The fluorescent light produced a glare on her damp uniform, but her focus remained absolute. Finally, she rose and returned to her mop. Felix turned to leave, but she lifted a hand to stop him. "I've got this," she said softly. He nodded and backed away, leaving her alone in the hush. Gerald strolled back, pausing beside Janet like a vulture inspecting its prey. She sensed his satisfaction before he spoke. "Nice work," he intoned, voice dripping with false praise. "But watch for that corner." He pointed at the very spot she had just abandoned, now sullied by a faint smear. "You see that? Clean it again." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She tucked her pride behind a mask of composure and knelt once more. Water pooled at her knees, her uniform soaked through. She scrubbed meticulously until the floor gleamed like glass under her hands. Only then did she rise and glance at Gerald's back as he walked away, whistling, soft and content. The corridor lights seemed to flicker as though applauding her determination. But Janet didn't pause to bask in any imagined applause. She refilled her cart's mop bucket and covered the next section. Each step forward, each pass of the mop became an unspoken vow she would not break, would not back down even under this torrent of petty cruelty. Moments later, Gerald returned. He stood directly in Janet's path, hands on hips. She stopped mid-sweep, water dripping from the mop. He reached out, placing a single polished toe atop the area she had just cleaned. The ridge of dust he tracked behind him cut a dirty line across the shine. "Do over," he said, voice low and smug. Janet's heart thundered. Her mind beckoned her to protest, to remind him that she had already done 10 times the work he'd put into a single step. But she forced herself to exhale, to tilt her chin up. "Yes, sir," she replied, then bent once again to wipe away the fresh smudge. As she worked, she felt his gaze like a brand on her back. Her uniform clung to her skin and chills skittered up her arms. Sweat dampened her collar, but beneath the physical discomfort, a muscle in her chest pulsed with rage and with resolve. So many nights early in her career, she'd faced verbal assaults from investors and executives who thought her too young, too inexperienced, too black. She had learned then that silence could be a shield and action the real answer. She finished the corridor in the same silent ritual, moving from one end to the other, leaving only brilliance behind her. No trace of dust, no hint of her anger. Only immaculate reflection, just as Gerald demanded. When at last she straightened, she caught her own face in the floor's mirrored surface, pale but unbowed eyes, sharp. Gerald stood at the opposite end, arms folded. He took a step forward, eyes narrowing in assessment. "I'll say this, Janet. You know how to work a mop." He gave a curt nod. "Don't think I'll go easy on you just because you did it once. Next time, there's no second chance." His final warning hung in the humid air as he turned and walked away, the door to his office clicking closed behind him. Janet released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She gathered her cart and moved on to the next task, but the echo of Gerald's taunts trailed her like a shadow. The night deepened. Time blurred as she cleaned conference rooms and elevator doors, always mindful of the managers whose disdain she encountered at every turn. Some never deigned to look up from their smartphones. Others sneered as they brushed past umbrellas dripping on freshly mopped floors. But Janet moved among them like a ghost, unseen, unheard, yet ever present. In the break area, Felix waited with steaming coffee and a sympathetic gaze. "Don't let him get to you," he whispered, placing a cup in her hand. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers, and she offered him a faint, grateful smile. No words passed between them, they didn't need to. Even a ghost deserves an ally. When her shift finally ended, Janet filed her card in the closet and washed her hands at the far corner sink. She studied the reflection of Janet in the mirror, a ghostly figure in faded overalls, hair pulled back into a bun. She cleaned her uniform one last time, straightening every crease as though stewarding a suit of armor. Before slipping out the service exit, she lingered in the lobby, watching the security guard pocket his phone and nod at her. No recognition. It was as it should be. Outside, she inhaled the night air, neon streetlights pooling in the rain-slick pavement. Tears of cold water and indignity seemed to drip from her sleeves, but beneath them rose a fierce clarity. These streets, these offices, these corridors were hers by right. She had built this empire from nothing, so she would not let it be desecrated under cheap suits and petty tyrants. In her mind, she reviewed the evening's events. Gerald's mocking, the forced re-cleans, the trampling feet, the whispered "next time, no second chance." Each instance of cruelty cataloged itself in her memory archive, each insult a data point fueling her determination. She would gather proof, she would expose them, and she would reclaim the soul she had entrusted to her heir. Janet walked to her rental car body, exhausted but spirit alight. Her resolve had crystallized the silent endurance, the meticulous work. It was all part of a larger plan. First blood had been drawn that night, and though it had come at her own expense, it marked the opening of a long-awaited reckoning. The rot would be revealed in full, and when the moment came, Janet would step out of the shadows, her identity blazing like a beacon. For now, she drove into the night, the city lights flickering around her like distant promises. Gerald Hayes would continue his reign of small cruelties until he and the others learned that the founder of Williams Innovations was no ordinary prey, but the architect of her own destiny, ready to overturn their world with patient, unyielding justice. The next night, Janet slipped back into the hush of Williams Innovations corridors just after the last analyst flicked off the lights. The marble floors still glimmered from her earlier pass. Her mop whispered across the surface as she moved toward the west wing. In this silent expanse, her steps carried a weight far heavier than a mere cleaning shift. Every polished tile felt like a mirror reflecting the company's unspoken secrets. Whispers of cruelty and contempt that the night's shadows concealed but never erased. Janet paused outside a supply closet where several other janitors left their carts in neat rows. Felix was nowhere in sight tonight. Instead, she found Maria, the quiet young woman from Human Resources night crew, perched on a low stool wiping away tears with a crumpled rag. Maria's uniform shimmered with fresh streaks of polish and dust, but her shoulders shook with unspoken sorrow. Janet sat beside her. "Hey," she said softly. Maria startled, pressing her palms against her face before lowering them to reveal red-rimmed eyes. The girl's name tag read Maria. Under the fluorescent glow, Janet saw the tremor in her hands as she dabbed at her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Maria's stammered voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want anyone to see." Janet placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she said. "What happened?" Maria inhaled sharply, gripping the rag like a lifeline. "Gerald, he caught me in the hallway by his office. I dropped a bottle of glass cleaner. It shattered. I swear I'm not clumsy." She glanced down at the shattered pieces glittering in her lap. He screamed at me, called me names, told me people like me didn't belong here, that I was lucky he let me keep my job." Her voice cracked and she buried her face again. Janet pressed a tissue into Maria's hand. "That wasn't right," she said firmly. "You don't deserve that." Maria pulled herself together, cheeks wet but determined. It's normal. He does it all the time. No one says anything because we're just janitors. We clean up after them. They don't see us." Janet's chest tightened. She had expected indifference, but never this deep resignation. "It shouldn't be normal," she replied. "You deserve respect." Maria's head snapped up, eyes wide. "You really think so?" Janet nodded. For a moment she considered revealing her true name, her legacy. But she remained Janet, silent and invisible, a fellow janitor. "We all deserve respect," she said. "I'm here if you need help anything." Maria swallowed hard. "Thank you." Her composure wavered, and for a moment Janet felt the fragile flicker of connection. Around them, the corridor's silence seemed to soften, as if granting them a private realm of solidarity. Janet rose, pressing a gentle hand to Maria's arm. "Get some rest," she urged. "I'll finish up here." Maria nodded, standing on shaky legs. Janet watched her disappear around the corner, mop handle in hand, chin set with a new resolve. This anecdote, one among many, had cut deeper than any spilled water or demanded reclean. It exposed a silent suffering that no HR memo could mend. Janet resumed her root mop, gliding beneath office doors, the corridor's emptiness magnifying the echo of her actions. Every whisper of cloth against tile reminded her that for each gleaming surface there were dozens of unseen indignities. She paused before the glass-walled executive suite, peering through the frosted threshold at rows of empty chairs. Only yesterday, those seats had held managers who sneered at their cleaners. Today, the room lay untouched, anticipating the board's return. She traced a fingertip along the glass, her reflection faint but unbroken, and let herself feel the weight of her mission anew. As she rounded the corner, the distant hum of a printer in an open-plan area marked the presence of late-staying staff. Two marketing assistants, smart in blazers and heels, passed her without a glance, animatedly discussing an upcoming campaign. Their words spilled out. "We just need to make sure the visuals pop. The global team won't budge otherwise." They strode on, utterly unaware of the woman polishing the very floor they strode across, polishing away the scuffs from their heels. Janet's grip on the mop tightened. They spoke of pop global campaigns, buzzwords shimmering above millions in revenue, yet they failed to see the humanity beneath a uniform. She lowered herself to inspect the floor near their conference room. Tiny specks of debris resisted her first swipe. She leaned in, scrubbing with deliberate care. If the world wouldn't notice these janitorial souls, she would make each tile impeccable. Further down the hall, she caught sight of Derek Phillips, the marketing director, whose charisma masked a ruthless streak. He emerged from his glass office phone at his ear. He was mid-conversation. "Yes, I need that deck updated by first thing, and don't bother me again for minor edits. We're under a microscope." He ended the call, pocketed his phone, and strode toward the break area without a backward glance. Janet waited for the whoosh of the automatic door. When it sealed behind him, she knelt to scrub a coffee stain he had left from this morning's rush. Her elbow brushed the stain, semi-dried dark brown, bright against the pale floor. With each pass of the cloth, she imagined wiping away the implicit contempt behind Derek's clipped instructions. The world was fast-bustling, profit-driven, but here in the silent corridors she unearthed the cost dignity trampled underfoot. She straightened and rounded the final bend to the freight elevator mop balanced on her shoulder like a silent weapon. The elevator doors moaned open, and she stepped inside alone with her thoughts. The interior gleamed, but her reflection in the polished walls looked weary. Her body ached. Nights of shuttling from floor to floor weighed on her muscles. Yet despite the exhaustion, a fierce clarity filled her mind. This chapter was about giving a voice to the voiceless. The elevator dinged at the lobby. Janitorial staff filtered out Felix with his cart. Sarah with her vacuum and a handful of others, each moving silently toward the supply exit. Janie, the youngest, lingered near the door, rubbing her wrist. As the others moved on, she sighed. Janet crossed to her. "You okay?" she asked. Janie looked up startled. "Yeah, just a cramp. I'll manage." Janet nodded. "Take care of yourself. Stretch every once in a while." Janie managed a small smile. "Thanks." Mary paused by the time clock, pulling her ID from her pocket. Rather than punching out, she slipped it into her pocket, unswiped. This wasn't just a clock-in, clock-out routine. It was a portal into a reality no memo could capture. She stepped onto the street, which stung with early morning chill. Taxicabs rattled by. Skyscrapers loomed. Office workers streamed down the sidewalks, coffee in hand, oblivious to the night's unseen battles. Mary hooked her cart's handle to the supply bay trolley and wheeled it back into the service entrance. The doors hissed shut, and the night's hush returned, leaving her alone with unfinished floors and unspoken truths. Along the way home, she mentally cataloged the faces she'd met: the tearful Maria, the stoic Janie, the nervy Felix. Each a thread in the tapestry of silent suffering. She vowed that their resilience would not be in vain. When the time came, they would have a voice. She would make sure every stride she took on these corridors built toward that moment of reckoning. Because you cannot have a company built on human dignity and allow its employees to be unseen specters of shame. In her apartment, Mary shed the uniform in her bathroom, staring at the reflection in the fogged mirror. Janet would return tomorrow and the next night and the next. Each evening, she uncovered a new layer of rot, but she also uncovered solidarity, a shared refusal to accept humiliation. Her final act before sleep was to text Robert Need to talk tonight. It's urgent. His prompt response, "I'm here for you," felt like a lifeline. She didn't reveal details. She didn't need to. He knew enough to meet her on equal ground when the time came. Lying in bed, Mary replayed the night's events in her mind: the silent apologies of fellow janitors, the sting of Maria's tears, the echoing clang of the mop's metal frame. Each scene etched itself deeper into her resolve. Sidelined in shadows, these cleaners endured daily injustice. And Mary Williams, founder turned custodian, would stand as their witness and their champion when the dawn finally brought truth to light. The following evening, when the city beyond the skyscraper windows had slipped into twilight, Janet made her way to the 20th floor Human Resources wing. Her mop cart trundled softly behind her wheels, whispering on the polished hallway tile. She paused before double-glass doors etched with the words, Human Resources, took a breath and let her knuckles rap once sharply against the frosted surface. Inside, the air was unnervingly cool air conditioning set to a crisp efficiency that made her skin prickle. Tall, potted plants clustered in corners, and framed company values hung on ivory walls. Integrity, inclusion, innovation. A small reception desk was manned by a single assistant tapping on a computer. Janet cleared her throat. The assistant regarded her coolly, as if she'd walked into the wrong office. I need to speak with Karen Mitchell," Janet said, voice steady but polite. "It's important." The assistant glasses perched at the tip of her nose, tight bun pastel blouse raised an eyebrow. Miss Mitchell is in a meeting, she replied evenly. Do you have an appointment? Janet shook her head. No appointment. But it's urgent. It's about employee treatment. The assistant's lips curved into a practiced smile that failed to reach her eyes. Human Resources handles a lot of claims. If it's urgent, you should submit a form via the intranet. Janet's chest tightened, but she nodded and squared her shoulders. I'll wait, she said. The assistant tapped a few keys, then flicked her gaze down. She'll see you when she's available, she said, dismissing Janet with a flick of her pen. Janet crossed to a small seating area, clutching her cleaning gloves like a lifeline. She seated herself on a leather armchair, back rigid, eyes fixed on the frosted doors. The ticking of a wall clock seemed impossibly loud, each second mocking her. On one side, a thick binder titled Employee Grievance Procedures lay untouched on a coffee table. She resisted the urge to pick it up to let the corporate language of policy give her false hope. After nearly 20 minutes, the doors hissed open. Karen Mitchell stepped out, clipboard in hand, heels clicking sharply on the tile. Karen's hair was pulled into a sleek chignon. Her navy blazer was impeccably tailored. She offered Janet a single nod. Janet, what is it? She asked, voice cordial but distant. Janet rose, wiping her hands discreetly on her uniform. She followed Karen into the inner office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city lights. A mahogany desk dominated the center, papers stacked neatly at one corner, and 2 guest chairs faced the desk. Sit, Karen said, gesturing to one chair. Make it quick. I have a departmental meeting in 10 minutes. Janet perched on the edge of the leather seat, mind whirling for the right words. Thank you, she began. I wanted to report some serious mistreatment by management, specifically Gerald Hayes in operations and Derek Phillips in marketing. Their behavior goes beyond strictness. There are public humiliations, cruel remarks, even physical incidents. She paused, searching Karen's face for empathy. Karen's lips tightened. She glanced at her watch. Let me stop you there, she said briskly. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. Janet, I appreciate your concern, but I have to wonder if you're overreacting. Our managers are under immense pressure to meet quarterly targets. Sometimes their communication style can seem harsh to lower-level staff. Janet's heart pounded. The words felt like a slap. Harsh, she repeated, voice calm but firm. Last week, Gerald poured cold water over a janitor's head because she hadn't polished the floor to his liking. He called her worthless. Then Derek spilled coffee in the hallway and forced her to clean it 15 times. These aren't isolated incidents, they reflect a pattern of deliberate cruelty. Karen's eyes flickered, but her tone stayed cool. I'm aware that tensions can run high, but Janet, we have policies. Formal processes for dealing with grievances. You should have filed a report through the proper channels. Emotional reactions sometimes look like principle, but they can be misinterpreted as oversensitivity. Janet pressed her palms into her lap, fighting the urge to stand and demand justice. I couldn't go through standard channels, she said quietly. I tried to tell the assistant, but I was told to submit an online form. Meanwhile, Maria from the night crew was in tears after Gerald humiliated her. She needs immediate support. Karen leaned forward, a look of thinly veiled impatience flickering across her face. If Maria is upset, I suggest she attends our empathy training workshop next week, she said. And remember, Janet, these managers are senior leaders. Their track record in elevating this company isn't in question. We can't afford to undermine them based on unverified anecdotes. Janet's throat tightened. Unverified, she echoed. I have witnesses. I have... She paused, recalling the reason she hadn't come armed with tapes or documents. She wanted to see if HR would act first based on principle alone. Karen's expression shifted to a slight frown. I don't have time for hearsay, she said. If you're here to complain, go through official channels. Otherwise, I'm afraid I have to dismiss this. She tapped her pen against the desk. Janet felt a wave of fury mingle with heartbreak. HR, the department sworn to protect employees, had become a shield for abusive management. She rose slowly, buckling her resolve. Thank you for your time, she said, voice eerily calm. I'll follow your advice. Karen stood smoothing her skirt. Good, she said. I'll expect to see that report in my inbox. Now, if you'll excuse me, She swept past Janet and out the door, leaving it ajar. Janet stood in the silent office, absorbing the cold betrayal. She brushed a loose thread from her uniform and exhaled, reclaiming her composure. The muffled buzz of conversation seeped under the door, HR staff preparing for their next meeting, entirely unaware of the crisis outside. She pivoted and strode out of the office, each step resolute she would not rely on polite procedures or hollow promises. If HR had failed, she would collect the evidence herself. She pressed her back against the wall, unbuckled the hidden recorder clipped to her cart, and tapped a button. The soft red LED glowed. Outside the office, she spotted Janie checking her phone, waiting for the elevator. "Hey, Janet," said softly, pausing by her side. "You okay?" Janie looked up, startled. "Yeah," she lied, pocketing her phone. "Just saw you talking to Karen." Janet gave a wry half-smile. "She's not going to help, I'm afraid." She peered down the hall at the empty supply bay. "But I'm going to get you help." Janie's eyebrows knitted. "Like what?" Janet leaned closer, voice low. "I'm collecting everything, recordings, documents, witnesses. When the time's right, no one will be able to ignore us." They shared a look of understanding, two custodians bound by quiet defiance. Janie nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes, and ducked into the supply bay. Janet continued down the corridor, heart thrumming with purpose. The night's chill had grown, but in her chest a fire burned brighter than any fluorescent light. She paused at the stairwell landing, pressing her forehead against the cool concrete. For a moment she closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every insult, every dismissal. Then she straightened, slipped the recorder into her pocket, and stepped into the service elevator. The doors slid shut behind her with a click that sounded like the final seal on her decision. No more shadows, no more cold shoulders. When the elevator dinged at the 15th floor, Janet emerged to find Felix leaning against the wall, surveying the empty hallway. He gave her a wary nod. She returned it, a silent promise passing between them. Tonight HR had failed. Tomorrow they would see just how formidable Janet could be when armed with the truth. Late one evening, long after the hustle of the marketing department had died down, the corridor outside Derek Phillips's office fell into near silence. Janet paused for a moment, mop in hand, listening to the faint hum of Derek's computer through the thick glass door. She braced herself tonight would be another test of her resolve. Earlier that afternoon, Janet had caught sight of Derek in the lobby, charming in a crisp suit, weaving through a cluster of employees with practiced ease. His polished shoes gleamed every inch the rising star of Williams' innovations. But beneath that suave exterior lay a ruthless streak nobody dared speak of. Tonight, he would remind Janet why the janitorial staff moved like ghosts, afraid to claim even a flicker of recognition. She wheeled her cart down the polished tile, pausing outside the open door of the marketing director's suite. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and designer cologne. Through the glass, she saw Derek's silhouette as he tapped furiously at the keyboard. Reports, presentations, client pitches, the lifeblood of his success. Janet set her cart gently against the wall and peered inside, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He looked up, saw her reflection in the glass, and his lips curved into a cold smile. "Ah, Janet?" he called, voice warm but laced with condescension. "Perfect timing." Janet offered a slight nod. "Good evening, Mr. Phillips." He stood crossing the room in long strides. His tailored jacket flared behind him, and he reached into a stack of files on his desk. "I just spilled coffee here," he said, lifting a lavish ceramic mug that bore a lipstick stain. "Could you give this area another go? I'd hate for a client to think we can't maintain basic cleanliness." His tone was smooth, as if he were asking a favor for a dear friend. But Janet sensed the trap. She slipped her mop under her arm. "Certainly," she replied. She stepped inside and reached for the pile of papers Derek had left beside the stained financial forecasts, printed on crisp A4 sheets. With a careful hand, she stacked them, mopping the dark stain from the desk's glossy finish. Each pass of the cloth felt like a gauntlet thrown down. When she finished, Derek observed her with a faintly raised eyebrow. "Excellent," he said. "But while you're at it, could you sort these for me? I can never remember which deck goes to which region. I need the European slides first, then Asia, then North America." He thrust the fanned-out papers at her. "Think you can handle that?" Janet set the damp rag on the edge of the desk, her fingers brushing the stain she'd just removed. She inhaled and steeled herself. "Of course." She sorted the slides by their header labels, voice quiet, as she handed them back in perfect order. Derek tapped the one labeled Europe, then tossed the others across the room. They fluttered like wounded birds, papers landing near the foot of Janet's mop bucket. A single sheet slid across the floor, teetering dangerously close to the edge of the desk. Janet suppressed a sigh and gathered the strewn pages once more. "You see," Derek said, stepping back, hands in pockets, "it's not enough to scrub floors. You have to think on your feet, too. I need someone who can multitask and anticipate needs. Yet here you are still learning the difference between a dust bunny and a data chart." He laughed softly, and the sound hung in the air, a serrated edge of mockery. Janet's throat tightened, but she pressed her lips together and continued folding the pages, returning each section to its rightful place. At last he snapped his fingers. Perfect. Now one final thing. He lifted a decorative glass paperweight adorned with the company logo and placed it atop a stack. Then with an almost casual gesture, he slid the entire pile toward Janet. "Here, take these to the break room recycling bin. I wouldn't want them cluttering up my desk." Janet froze. These were the final polished renditions of next quarter's campaign, a product of Derek's hours, perhaps weeks of labor. "Mr. Phillips." "These documents." Derek cut her off with a dismissive shrug. "I have digital copies," he said. "Trust me, you won't need to recycle them if you value your job." His eyes glinted. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Janet. Always eager to please. It's admirable. Don't disappoint." He turned sharply on his heel, his expensive shoes clicking on the tile. With that, his door hissed shut. Janet stood alone amidst the scattered papers, heart pounding. A dizzying swirl of indignation and disbelief threatened to overwhelm her. Those presentations, her predecessor's work gone in an instant, tossed like yesterday's news because Derek felt amused. The stunt was pure psychological warfare, a demonstration of power that left her breathless. She knelt to gather the scattered sheets, pressing each one carefully against her chest, before carrying them to the recycling bin outside. The handles scraped against her palms, her uniform damp with sweat, and cleaning solution clung to her back. She deposited the papers in the bin with an echoing clunk, then leaned against the wall, fists clenched at her sides. Moments later, Felix appeared in the hallway carrying a mop and bucket. His eyes widened at the sight of her trembling posture. "You okay, Janet?" he whispered, voice hushed. Janet looked at him, shoulders heaving slightly. She gave a small, wry smile. "Just another day," she said softly, as if sharing a dark joke. Felix shook his head. He did what Janet shook out her sleeves. He recycled my work. She paused, swallowing. "Mine. My work." Felix's jaw clenched. That's awful." He hefted his mop. "He's got to go too far before HR does something right." Janet offered him a sympathetic nod, but her eyes burned with a sober truth. "They won't," she said. "Not yet." Felix's face fell, and he ducked back into the supply closet. Janet pressed her back against the cool wall, taking deep breaths. Derek's cruelty was no longer limited to public humiliation or petty sabotage. It had escalated into a targeted attack on her livelihood and dignity. Her blood hammered in her ears as she recalled every leer, every mocking comment. Each moment had steeled her resolve. She resumed her route mop in hand, but each step felt heavier now, weighted by the memory of Derek's leering satisfaction. She encountered a polishing machine by the executive elevator and paused. With a steady hand, she engaged the machine's controls, sending a fan-shaped spray of polish across the tile in wide, confident arcs. The nozzle hissed in protest, but she steered it with purpose, asserting control over her domain. By the time she reached the lobby, the floors gleamed so brightly that her reflection shimmered like a living portrait. She caught sight of her own eyes in the glass double doors, the same eyes that Derek had eyed for amusement and contempt. She straightened her spine and squared her shoulders. No one would mistake her for timid prey tonight. That night, she slept fitfully, mind replaying the day's taunts. But by dawn, her exhaustion had transformed into clarity. Psychological warfare relied on eroding confidence through relentless small cruelties. But Janet Mary Williams in disguise knew how to endure. She had weathered boardroom battles that tested million-dollar contracts. She had stared down investors who questioned her credentials simply because of her gender and skin color. Derek's jibes, while vicious, were echoes of the same prejudice she had faced earlier in her career. She would not be undone. When the next shift began, Janet arrived at the service elevator 5 minutes early. The corridor lights flickered on and the polished marble awaited her ministrations. She paused in the hush, recalling her father's advice, use their cruelty to fuel your strength. She set her cart in motion, mop blade slicing through dust, polishing away the residue of Derek's games. Each pass was a declaration she would not break, she would not bow. Later that afternoon, she passed the executive offices and caught sight of Derek through the open door. He stood by the window phone in hand, oblivious to her presence. His posture was triumphant. He had staged this humiliation as surely as a strategic play. But now Janet saw his shadow cast long and alone. She lifted her gaze, meeting his reflection in the glass behind him. He saw himself at the center of a glittering empire, but that image was brittle, held together by fear and leverage. She saw the cracks. Moving on, she returned to the break area where Maria and Janie whispered over coffee. They froze as she entered, looking at her with apprehension and gratitude. Maria's eyes glistened. He did it again, didn't he? She asked. Janet gave a firm nod. Yes, she said. But tonight I have a plan. She leaned forward, voice low but urgent. We won't let him keep terrorizing us. I'm collecting everything videos, witness statements, so that when we're ready, no one can ignore it. Janie's shoulders straightened. Thank you, she said, voice quivering but determined. Janet smiled a real smile that carried warmth and shared purpose. We're in this together, she said. I promise you they'll see us. As she wheeled her cart out of the break area, the corridor echoed with the hum of overhead lights. Psychological warfare thrived on isolation, on convincing victims they were alone. But tonight Janet had broken that spell. The next night she would return to Derek's domain not as a silent target, but as a witness armed with evident solidarity and the unshakable resolve of a woman who knew her worth. And each step she took in those corridors under the watchful eyes of her oppressors would bring her closer to the moment when she would reveal the truth and reclaim the soul of William's innovations from the darkness it had fostered. That night, after the last of the cleaning crew had clocked out, Janet lingered in the supply closet long enough to affix 2 miniature cameras beneath the handle of her mop cart. She clipped a voice recorder to the underside of her smock, its sleek black body hidden beneath the folds of fabric. With every piece of equipment, the cameras, the recorder, and the microchip-packed watch on her wrist, she felt the weight of her mission settle more firmly on her shoulders. Tonight, the truth would be laid bare. She emerged from the closet just as the janitor's stairwell door clicked shut behind her. The building's corridors were deserted, lit only by the soft glow of emergency LED strips lining the ceiling. The hush felt surveillance-friendly, every footstep echoing like a heartbeat. She adjusted her cart, test running a discreet camera lens aimed at the corridor ahead, then rolled onward toward the locked boardroom on the 45th floor. Every floor the elevator climbed brought her closer to the company's nerve center and to the conspiracy she needed to capture. The doors dinged. She stepped out, letting the closing gates mask the soft whir of her rigged cart. The hallway was wider here, plush carpeting replaced by marbled tile that gleamed under motion sensors. A single security camera perched near the ceiling, but its gaze was fixed on the elevator, oblivious to her covert stowaways. Janet moved with deliberate slowness, cartwheels whispering against tile. She paused outside the boardroom's frosted glass doors where a small plaque read, Board of Directors. Beneath it, a slender keycard reader glowed amber. She inhaled the cold night air hum of the building filling her ears. Then moments before midnight, the doors hissed open. In stepped Gerald Hayes, flanked by Derek Phillips. A moment later, Veronica Wells and Karen Mitchell appeared behind them, as if summoned by an unspoken command. Janet ducked into the shadow of a recessed alcove just outside the door, the recorder on her chest silently humming to life. Through the frosted glass, she could make out their shapes against the muted glow of the boardroom's interior lighting. She inched forward until the lenses on her cart caught a glimpse of their faces, then froze, heart-pounding. The forbidden meeting was about to commence. Gerald's voice broke the silence. We can't wait any longer, he said, tone low but urgent. Robert's suspicions are growing. If we don't move soon, he'll put 2 and 2 together. Derek laughed a brittle sound. Let him try. He's out of his depth. We've built momentum here. All we need is to shift enough budget into the subsidiaries under our control. He won't see it coming. Veronica's voice rattled the glass with its cold precision. I've arranged for the performance reports to flag his leadership competency. Once the board sees the data, they'll have no choice but to replace him. The recorder captured every word crisp and damning. Janet's stomach churned as she pressed herself flat against the wall. Karen's voice, smooth but deadly serious, added, "Good. Then we'll take over, the four of us as an executive committee. We'll steer Williams Innovations toward higher margins, no more values distractions." She spat the word like poison. "And I've already consulted with legal on embezzling excess funds through shell entities. By the time regulatory audits come, the money will be untraceable." Janet's breath caught. Shell entities. Embezzlement. It was worse than she'd feared. The very pillars of the company's integrity were being corroded from within. Derek leaned forward, a conspiratorial grin twisting his lips. "And once Robert's out, we move the Franklin deal into the subsidiary's portfolio. The press will eat it up. We'll make ourselves indispensable." The boardroom was thick with their collusion, the air heavy. Janet felt her pulse accelerate, knowing she was witnessing a betrayal that could destroy everything her son and she had built. She nudged her cart forward an inch, feet aching for the soft carpet of normal janitorial corridors. A small squeak sounded, the wheel pivoting against tile. Gerald's gaze flicked to the door. For a heartbeat, Janet thought she'd been detected. She froze, blinking in the shadow. Then Gerald turned away, unconvinced, and continued. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she pressed the record button on her watch, capturing the last snippets of dialogue. "Tonight," Gerald concluded, "we execute. After the board votes Robert out next week, we'll announce an internal restructuring. Publicly, we'll frame it as his retirement sudden but amicable. Nobody will question the smooth transition." Veronica scoffed. "By then the funds will be in our offshore accounts and too late for anyone to trace." She tapped at her phone. "I've already drafted the email to the legal team. Just waiting for clearance." Karen closed the swivel door with a soft click, standing. "Let's reconvene Monday morning." In the meantime, Janet, she sneered the name Finish Cleaning Room 452. "I don't want any dust to unravel our plans." Her cruel smile sent a chill through Janet's bones. The quartet filed out, leaving the boardroom door ajar. Janet's recorder clicked off the cameras, blinking red. She waited until their footsteps receded down the hallway, then slipped inside the boardroom. Heart pounding so loudly, she thought it might register on her mic. The sprawling table lay littered with half-drunk coffee mugs and the files Derek had commandeered. She angled her phone camera to capture invoices, budget reports, and manipulated charts pinned to a presentation board, evidence of their financial machinations. Every scrap of paper, every statistical projection became proof of their betrayal. Footsteps approached. Janet ducked behind the chairs, fingers probing her pockets until she found the USB stick she'd stashed earlier. She plugged it into her phone to transfer the files, quickly watching in her viewfinder as they downloaded. Minutes felt like hours, but at last the progress bar blinked 100%. Heart in her throat, she withdrew the stick, pocketed it, and straightened. The cleaning cart's hidden cameras had captured the entire meeting. The voice recorder had the rest. She wiped the desk's surface, leaving no trace of her intrusion, no fingerprint, no hair. When she finished, her mop swished across the floor, polishing the tile until it gleamed like glass. Outside, the marble corridor awaited. Janet stepped into the corridor cart, following in silent homage to her covert victories. She moved quickly but methodically, mop flicking away accidental smudges as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Once she reached the supply closet, she locked the cart inside and leaned against the cool metal. Her mind raced, adrenaline pulsing in her veins. She slipped the USB drive into the recorder's slot and ensured the files were backed up. Her phone screen confirmed the video and audio clip sat safely ready for the moment of reckoning. Felix rounded the corner, yawning, mop in hand. Still working, he whispered, eyes wide. Janet gave a weary smile. "Long night," she replied. "But worth it." He nodded, catching sight of the determined glint in her eye. "We need to stick together," he said, voice low. "Whatever you decide, you'll have my support." Janet placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Felix. I've got what I need. Soon no one will be able to pretend they didn't see." She headed for the stairwell, each step toward the lobby, a beat closer to the truth's emergence. Beneath her uniform, her hidden cameras and recorder had borne silent witness to the rot festering at Williams Innovation's core. Now armed with incontrovertible proof, she would stand with Robert to restore the company's soul. When the elevator hummed open at the lobby level, Janet stepped into the cavernous space, letting the surveillance cameras overhead count her as just another custodian. The gold leafing on the bank of marble columns gleamed oblivious to the coup plotted mere floors above. She wheeled her cart to the service exit, sliding out into the night air. Above, the city thrummed with activity, neon signs flickering like distant stars. In her pocket, the USB drive burned with the truth it held. Tomorrow would bring a gathering, one where the board would see and hear everything: the cold calculations, the whispered betrayals, the plans to oust her son and pillage his life's work. Mary Williams, in the guise of Janet the janitor, had collected every confession. Now it was time to release it, to end the conspiracy with the force of evidence too clear to deny. As she walked beneath the building's portico mop cart trailing behind like a loyal sentinel, Janet paused and looked back at the gleaming facade. The headquarters loomed tall, a monument to innovation and prosperity. Soon it would also bear witness to its savior's courage, ensuring that Williams Innovations reclaimed the integrity Mary had once poured her life into building. Because proof once gathered is a living thing, undeniable, unstoppable, and destined to change everything it touches. And tonight, Mary's proof would set the stage for the company's reckoning and its rebirth. Mary eased the door to Robert's high-rise apartment closed behind her, the soft click echoing in the marble-tiled foyer. In the gentle glow of the evening sky, the city's lights shimmered through floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the living room in a cool, muted blue. Mary stood for a heartbeat, the weight of her double life still clinging to her gray uniform folded neatly in a tote bag, hidden beneath her arm. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Robert sat on the edge of a sleek leather sectional, tapping his phone nervously. He looked up at her entrance, confusion and relief warring in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, rushing forward. What happened?" "Your call made it sound urgent." Mary set her tote aside and met his gaze. She could see the flicker of hope in his expression, tinged with guilt at not sensing her pain sooner. She reached out, laying a reassuring hand on his forearm. "I went undercover," she said softly. "As a janitor, remember, I told you I needed to confirm things for myself." Robert's brows shot up. "Janitor. Hear you? That's incredible. I'm so proud, but I'm also terrified. What did you see?" She drew a slow breath and motioned toward the glass-topped coffee table where her laptop sat, open the recorder and USB drive glinting beside it. "I have everything," she said, voice steady. "Every cruel word, every plan. I need you to watch this." She pressed play. The living room lights dimmed as the screen flickered to life. Gerald Hayes' voice, low, urgent, filled the space. Robert's jaw clenched as he recognized the grainy footage, 4 silhouettes around a mahogany boardroom table, voices carrying through the glass wall. "We need to move soon before Robert catches on," Gerald said, tone rattling with cold ambition. "Once he's out," Derek's smooth voice chimed in, "we shift funds into our subsidiaries, embezzle the rest through shell entities." Veronica's laugh was brittle. "And I've drafted the legal paperwork," she said. "We'll frame Robert's retirement as voluntary. Public will eat it up." Karen Mitchell's voice added the final blow. "By the time regulatory audits occur, the money will be untraceable." Robert's hand flew to his mouth as his mother paused the video. The tableau of betrayal pulsed on the silent screen. The man he had mentored, Gerald, now conspiring to oust him. Derek plotting to strip away the company's heart. Veronica and Karen manipulating legal loopholes for personal gain. Each name one of his mother's disciples now turned traitor. Tears stung Robert's eyes. They've been planning this behind my back. All this time." His voice cracked. Mary closed her laptop gently, aligning it with the edge of the table. She knelt before him, voice quiet, but unwavering. "Yes. They see me as an obstacle, 2 obstacles really, me and you. They'll stop at nothing to seize control." Robert rose, pacing by the window. He stared out at the city lights as if seeking answers in the urban sprawl. "I thought they were loyal," he muttered. "I put my faith in them." Why would they betray everything I stand for? Mary stood slipping off her smock to reveal the tailored blouse beneath. She straightened her posture, embodying the strength he'd always known her to have. Because they never had your vision, she said. They saw Williams' innovations as a ladder for their own advancement, not a family legacy to protect. Robert turned to face her vulnerability etched on his face. But my leadership. Did I miss the warning signs? Mary crossed the room and pulled Robert into an embrace. You were focused on growth, on innovation. That's your gift. You trusted that everyone shared your values, but values can be costly when they aren't enforced. He buried his face in her shoulder. She felt his shoulders tremble. What do we do now? He whispered. Mary drew back, eyes steeled with purpose. We fight! Together! She reached into her tote and pulled out the USB drive. This is our weapon. We present it to the board, but not as an attack. We give them the choice: stand with us and restore integrity, or be complicit in this coup. Robert inhaled sharply, nodding. We'll need a plan. If they resist, if Gerald and the others try to spin it. They can spin until they're blue in the face, Mary said, voice ringing with conviction. But the footage is undeniable. And the board respects you, not them. They'll act when the truth is laid out clearly. A moment of stillness hung between them as Robert let the reality settle. Then he straightened, pulling his mother's hand into his. You risked everything, he said. You undercover, facing their cruelty every night. You saved this company. Mary smiled, a flicker of pride softening her steely expression. No, she replied. You saved it. I only gave you the tools. He raised an eyebrow. High compliments for someone who's literally been mopping floors. She laughed, a rich, genuine sound. He laughed too, the tension easing, and for a moment they were just mother and son, bonded by shared purpose and fierce love. Robert moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Mary. To reclaiming our company, he said, raising his glass. Mary clinked hers lightly. To protecting its people, she added. They sipped in unison, the burn of the whiskey anchoring them. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, the air hummed with resolve. Over the next hour, they drafted their approach, how Robert would convene an emergency board meeting, how Mary would slip in one last time as Janet to trigger their entrance, how they'd present the evidence first, the recordings, then the financial documents, and offer the board a path forward. They planned for objections, rehearsed responses, and even scripted the moment when the 4 conspirators would realize their game was over. By the time dawn's pale light seeped into the apartment, mother and son sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes heavy, but hearts ablaze. They looked at the city skyline, Robert's domain, his legacy, now threatened but not defeated. Mary placed a hand on his. You're not alone, she said. This company was built on respect and shared vision. We'll remind them of that by force if necessary. Robert clasped her hand, voice firm. We will. And when the board votes, they'll choose integrity over greed. As the first rays of sunlight glittered on the skyscrapers, Mary slipped the USB drive into her pocket and stood. Get some rest, she urged. We have a battle ahead. She gathered her uniform in the tote and winked. Janet will be back tonight, ready to mop up the last of this conspiracy. He smiled, a hint of mischief in his tired eyes. I wouldn't want it any other way. They embraced again, fortified by their shared conviction. In that quiet apartment, the mother and son forged an unbreakable alliance. Their reckoning would come at breakfast, a board meeting where truth and justice would reclaim their rightful place. Because sometimes the fiercest battles are waged not on battlefields but in boardrooms, and the fiercest warriors wear the uniforms of those they fight to protect. The early morning sun streamed through the massive windows of the 45th floor boardroom, casting the long table in stark relief. Chairs were filled to bursting, senior leaders, regional directors, and the full board of directors had been summoned on moment's notice. A low murmur of shock still ricocheted off the polished walls. Nobody expected Robert Williams to call an emergency meeting, much less in response to a rumor about his own mother's undercover investigations. Robert stood at the head of the table, shoulders square-gaze, calm but unyielding. At his side sat Mary, no longer dressed in janitor's gray, but in a crisp blazer that marked her true identity. Between them, a sleek laptop glowed, the USB drive already hooked to its port. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming, he began, voice steady and resonant. I called this meeting because I've learned of a conspiracy to overthrow me and seize control of Williams Innovations. A collective gasp carried through the room. Gerald Hayes, seated to Robert's right, stiffened and glared at his son's calm facade. Robert continued. This betrayal involves none other than our operations manager, Gerald Hayes, marketing director, Derek Phillips, vice president, Veronica Wells, and HR director, Karen Mitchell. He gestured to the screen. I'm going to present evidence that cannot be disputed. Gerald's face turned ashen. He rose to his feet, glancing at the assembled directors. This is preposterous, he hissed. Robert, you're upset but accusing your mother's janitor, Janet, of wrongdoing. You need to remove her from this room immediately. Heads turned toward Mary, who stood silent, expression unreadable. Derek scoffed. Veronica's lip curled in derision. Karen's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. Robert held up a palm. One moment. He clicked the mouse, and the first video clip filled the screen. Shadowy figures gathered around a boardroom table, voices low yet unmistakable. Gerald recognized his own voice before the grainy image resolved his face. We need to move soon, he heard himself say before Robert puts two and two together. The room hushed, the only sound the whir of the projector. Robert advanced toward Gerald. Is that you? He asked quietly. Gerald's voice shook. It's doctored. It's out of context. No, Robert said, voice rising with controlled anger. Listen. He clicked again, and Derek's laugh, cold and triumphant, filled the room. Let him try. He's out of his depth. We've built momentum. We just need to shift funds into our subsidiaries. Gasps echoed. Veronica raised a shaky hand trying to interject, but the next clip began her own voice describing shell entities, the legal paperwork to funnel embezzled funds overseas. The board members' faces blanched. Enough, Veronica croaked, rising in panic. This is invasion of privacy. We can't. Silence. Mary's voice cut through the commotion. She stepped forward, palms flat on the table. All eyes swung to her, Janet, the janitor, who had cleaned their floors just nights before. She stood tall, chest lifted, hair brushed aside. I am Mary Williams, founder of this company, she declared, and I have been your empathy test and your truth teller. A stunned hush fell. Gerald sank back into his chair, mouth agape. Derek's eyes darted to Veronica. Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. Robert nodded to Mary. She continued, I recorded your conversations because I feared this very moment. I wanted to know if the stewards of my legacy were worthy. Apparently they are not. Mary paused, voice trembling only with righteous indignation. Your contempt for those you deem beneath you, our janitorial staff, our employees, has grown so normalized that you plotted my own son's downfall and planned to steal from this company. She turned to the board. You deserve full transparency. Mary tapped the keyboard, and the boardroom table transformed into a virtual crime scene, spreadsheets flagged with embezzled sums, flowcharts of shell entities, email chains drafted by Karen and Veronica outlining the legal cover. The evidence was irrefutable: screenshots, audio tracks, video clips, all laid bare in high-resolution clarity. The weight of betrayal settled heavily. A board member covered her mouth. Another's hand shook as he slid back his chair. Robert watched them with sorrow and resolve. Gerald finally spluttered. Mary. Robert. I can explain. Incompetence would have been forgivable, Robert said, standing. His voice echoed in the sudden stillness. But conspiracy to betray your own leadership, to steal from our workers and jeopardize our partnerships, particularly the Franklin deal, crosses every line. There can be no excuse. Gerald's shoulders slumped. Derek's smug veneer cracked Veronica's eyes, brimmed with tears, and Karen's mask of professionalism dissolved into shame. Robert lifted a pen. By the authority vested in me as CEO and majority shareholder, he intoned, I hereby suspend Gerald Hayes, Derek Phillips, Veronica Wells, and Karen Mitchell, effective immediately. You are to hand over company assets, access cards, and confidential materials to security upon leaving this room. Gerald's protest died in his throat. Derek shuffled papers, Veronica pressed her lips together, and Karen lowered her gaze. A pair of security officers appeared at the door, summoned at Robert's direction. They stood ready, stern and silent. Robert turned to Mary. Thank you, he said simply. You saved this company. Mary offered a weary smile. We saved it, she corrected. All of us together with truth and justice leading the way. Outside the boardroom, refreshed air met them as the doors swung open. Staff gathered in the hall, watching as the four conspirators, escorted by security, filed out with heads bowed. The buzz of whispered awe grew into murmurs of hope. Williams Innovations was reclaiming its soul. Mary lingered in the threshold, hand on Robert's arm. Let's rebuild, she said. Now that we've cleared out the rot, it's time to restore respect and integrity throughout every floor janitorial closet to executive suite. Robert nodded, his young face set with the maturity of someone who'd tasted betrayal and intended to change the rules. Starting today, he agreed. They closed the boardroom doors behind them, silencing the last echoes of conspiracy. In the bright corridor, their footsteps resounded with purpose. And as Mary looked around at the employees watching with fresh eyes, she felt hope blossom. This company born of courage and conviction was poised to rise again on the foundation of truth. The boardroom fallout had barely settled before Mary and Robert set to work transforming Williams Innovations from the wreckage of betrayal into a living testament to respect. In the days that followed, Mary returned to the building not as a hidden janitor, but as its guiding conscience. She and Robert met each morning in the same sunlit conference room where conspiracies had once been hatched, now clearing the stale air with open windows and honest conversation. Their first order of business was simple, yet profound. They would give every employee a voice. Mary insisted they begin by installing open doors throughout the corporate hierarchy. Literal glass-paneled offices replaced heavy opaque doors, and each door bore a sign, "Come in, you matter." Robert laughed at the unveiling ceremony, standing behind Mary as she affixed the first decal to his office door. "If I ever hide in here," she teased, "feel free to barge in." When he smiled and nodded, the ice between leadership and staff cracked for good. Next came the creation of transparent feedback channels. Mary had seen too many wrongs whispered in shadow. Now the company would shine light on every concern. They launched an internal digital platform dubbed Sounding Board, where employees could submit questions, suggestions, or complaints directly to a rotating committee of managers. Nothing would be hidden. Each week, Mary and Robert reviewed the top-rated posts, personally responding or assigning a team to investigate. Word spread quickly. Operations staff who once dared not speak a word now clicked. Submit with confidence, knowing their voices would drive real change. Policies followed. The old handbook, thick with arcane regulations and buried deep in the intranet, was replaced by a concise dignity-first covenant. Simple principles stating that every person from the CEO to the newest intern deserved to be treated with courtesy. Mandatory workshops replaced staid compliance training. In small circle-seated sessions, Mary and Robert spoke candidly with managers and staff alike, recounting the darkness they'd unearthed and emphasizing that respect must be more than a checkbox. They used real stories. Maria's tears in the hallway. Janet's smothered flinch when cold water poured down her back to illustrate the human cost of indifference. Laughter and tears mixed as employees realized that the crown of leadership carried the weight of responsibility, not just authority. Shared leadership became a pillar. Mary urged Robert to decentralize decision-making. Instead of top-down mandates, cross-functional teams were empowered to pilot projects with budget authority and the mandate to learn from mistakes. Marketing brainstormed new community outreach campaigns, operations prototyped eco-friendly packaging, and HR crafted equitable promotion guidelines. At the end of each month, teams presented their wins and their failures to the entire company. Wins were celebrated and failures were dissected without shame, all in the spirit of collective growth. When one project to streamline shipping software crashed spectacularly, the entire room applauded the team's candor and resilience, turning what could have been humiliation into forward momentum. Mary also insisted on daily hallway check-ins. She and Robert spent afternoons walking through every floor, speaking with employees over coffee or around an impromptu mop and matcha cart, Mary's nod to her janitorial roots. She listened to countless stories: a driver concerned about safety protocols, an analyst with an idea for a new fintech platform, a receptionist yearning for career development. Robert followed her lead, scribbling notes in a pocket notebook and promising follow-up. Sometimes they patched small leaks on the spot, A broken vending machine replaced a faulty light bulb, swapped out a missing stapler, found symbolic acts that told staff, "You're seen, you're heard, you're worth it." Their efforts culminated in a company-wide culture summit. The building's main atrium, once a gleaming but sterile lobby, was reimagined banners proclaiming respect in action, interactive stations where employees charted the company's progress on a giant timeline, and booths highlighting success stories from every department. Mary kicked off the summit by inviting Maria and Janet, now retired from undercover duty, onto the stage. The two women stood shyly before their colleagues, Janet's uniform replaced by a crisp blouse. Maria's tears long dried. Mary handed them microphones and they shared their experiences. The hall was silent, every eye riveted as they spoke of humiliation, of feeling invisible, and of the new promise a single courageous act had ignited. As applause washed over them, Mary felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with board seats or profit margins. She surveyed the faces around her, the young interns, the veteran engineers, the custodial crew, now standing shoulder to shoulder with executives, and knew that Williams Innovations was reborn through respect. In the weeks that followed, the culture overhaul rippled outward. Customer satisfaction scores climbed as frontline workers engaged with genuine enthusiasm. Turnover plummeted as employees no longer feared retribution. Innovation bloomed with new fintech pilots launched by small cross-departmental teams. Financially, the company stabilized. Revenue grew steadily as partnerships were renegotiated under the banner of integrity. Former investors took notice, drawn not by hype, but by the solidity of a company that valued people above profit. Yet Mary and Robert remained humble. They knew transformation was ongoing, a journey, not a destination. They kept their open doors unlocked, their sounding board live, and their footsteps echoing in the halls. At night, Mary sometimes lingered by the mop closet where the original cameras had once been installed and allowed herself a quiet smile at how far she'd come from janitor's uniform to mentor. One morning, a week before her 83rd birthday, Mary found an envelope slipped under her office door. No return address. Inside was a simple note on cream stationery penned in firm, confident script. "Not all of us are like him. Thank you." No name, no flourish. Just those words of solidarity. Mary unfolded the note and held it close, tears pricking her eyes. Those 5 words spoke volumes, unseen acts of courage, small rebellions of dignity, the tremors of change deep within the company's veins. She tucked the note into her desk drawer beside the original Real ID she'd once fished from the lobby floor, a memento of a singular act that had catalyzed this rebirth. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she found Robert in the atrium overseeing the installation of a new plaque, the Mary Williams Room, dedicated to celebrating servant leadership and courage. He turned at her approach, eyes bright. "They did it, Mom. They really did it." Mary rested a hand on his shoulder. "They did," she agreed. "All of us did together." They stood in silence, watching employees scatter seeds of kindness, passing out fresh coffee to the IT help desk, offering a ride to a weary driver, applauding a junior engineer's impromptu prototype demo. Small acts multiplied across aisles and floors, weaving a tapestry of respect. Mary thought about how she'd begun this journey shrouded in gray cleaning floors so she could see the truth hidden beneath polished surfaces. Now she watched the company sparkle with authenticity, each person a living testament to what dignity could achieve. As they turned to leave, Mary paused by the mop closet one last time, fingertips brushing the cold metal. She whispered a soft goodbye to her alter ego Janet, who had served her purpose. Then she slipped the closet door shut, arching her back and taking a deep breath of renewed purpose. Williams Innovations marched on, guided by principle rather than profit, buoyed by respect rather than fear. And Mary, stepping out into the bustling corridor, felt the quiet power of unseen courage that had ignited a company's rebirth and would, she knew, continue to kindle greatness in every heart she and Robert had touched.